A family searches for a new beginning, moving into a forgotten house perched on a hill, hoping to leave their past behind. But this house holds secrets, and the mirrors inside don't just reflect their faces, they show people who were never there. Whispers echo from the glass. Distorted reflections move on their own, and a name from a forgotten time keeps returning, Dr. Alaric Vane. As night falls, the walls themselves seem to remember the horrors they've witnessed. Each mirror hides a soul, a trapped echo of a life cut short, and some of those reflections are desperate to come back. They'll do anything to be free. Who's to remember some mirrors don't show you who you are. They show what's waiting right behind you. Hey, Tere, welcome to Shadows of Thales. I'm here to help you unwind and relax tonight, and I'm really glad you chose to spend these moments with me. Before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we create here. Your support means a lot, but your comfort always comes first. Feel free to drop a comment telling me where you're retuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It is always fascinating to see our little community connecting from different corners of the world. It reminds us that even in the quietest, darkest moments, none of us are truly alone. I hope you'll give this video a chance, because I truly believe you won't find stories quite like these anywhere else. Every tale here is crafted to help you drift into the night with ease. A mix of calm, mystery, and a touch of shadow. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan or a soft lamp. Take a deep breath, let the day fade away, and let's begin our story together. The road stretched out before them, a long, gray ribbon cutting through endless fields of withered gold. A single black SUV hummed along the gravel path, its tires kicking up dust that swirled in the fading afternoon light. Inside, a small family and all their worldly possessions rattled along, heading toward a new beginning. The sun was sinking low, painting the horizon in streaks of fiery orange and deep purple. Daniel gripped a steering wheel, his knuckles white. He drove in a tense silence, his jaw set. Every bump and rut in the road sent a jolt through the car, making the boxers in the back shift and groan. He was trying to project an air of confidence, but the isolation of this place was already starting to gnaw at him. Beside him, his wife, Clara, was lost in a folded property brochure. The photo on the front was faded, showing a tall, imposing mansion nearly consumed by ivy, shrouded in a thin veil of fog. It looked like something from a forgotten storybook. "It's bigger than I thought," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine's hum. "Yeah," Daniel replied, his eyes never leaving the road ahead. The price was too good to pass up. It was the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. They needed this fresh start, this escape. He just hoped this was the right way to get it. From the back seat, a small voice broke the silence. It was their 10-year-old daughter, Emily. She had been staring out the window for miles, her face a pale oval against the darkening landscape. "Mom," she said, her voice small but clear, "there's someone in the field." Clara turned sharply, her heart giving a little flutter. She scanned the fields, seeing nothing but tall, golden grass swaying in the breeze. The last rays of sun played tricks on the eyes out here. "Just your imagination, sweetheart," she said, trying to sound reassuring. Next to Emily, their teenage son, Ethan, let out a huff. He rolled his eyes and adjusted his headphones, turning up the volume to block out the world. "Creepy countryside," he muttered under his breath. "Just loud enough for everyone to hear. Can't wait for the Wi-Fi to die." He slumped further into his seat, already resigned to his fate. The car finally slowed as they approached a pair of rusted iron gates, twisted and ornate, standing like skeletal sentinels. They groaned in protest as Daniel pushed them open. At the end of a long, twisting driveway, shrouded by ancient, gnarled trees, stood the mansion. It was a three-story behemoth of dark stone and sharp angles. Its arched windows, like hollow eyes, caught the last glimmers of sunlight, making it seem as though the house itself was watching them arrive. Daniel turned the key in the heavy oak door. With a push, it swung inward, releasing a wave of cold, musty air. The smell of dust, damp wood, and something else, something old and forgotten flooded out to greet them. The house was silent, a deep, profound silence that seemed to swallow sound. Their footsteps echoed unervingly through the grand hallway as they stepped across the threshold, their voices small and thin in the vast space. The walls were lined with ancient mirrors in heavy, gilded frames. They were a little warped and clouded with age, their surfaces dull and distorted. "I guess the mirrors come with the house," Daniel said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow and weak in the cavernous hall. "They're beautiful," Clara murmured, running a hand over one of the ornate frames. "Look at the craftsmanship. They don't make things like this anymore." "They're creepy," Ethan countered immediately, his face a mask of disgust. He pointed to one near the end of the hall. "Look, that one's cracked." A jagged line ran from top to bottom, fracturing the reflection into a dozen mismatched pieces. But Emily wasn't looking at the cracked one. She was standing perfectly still before a tall, elegant mirror near the grand staircase. She stared at her own reflection, a feeling of unease prickling her skin. It seemed off just a fraction of a second too slow. Cautiously, she lifted her hand to wave. For a beat, her reflection didn't move. Then it hesitated and smiled, a wide, knowing smile that didn't reach its eyes. "Mom?" she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Clara turned from admiring a dusty chandelier. "What is it, honey?" She smiled first. Clara let out a nervous chuckle, dismissing it as a child's fantasy. "Don't be silly." She gently guided her daughter away from the mirror, towards the kitchen. But as she did, she couldn't resist a quick glance back over her shoulder, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought she saw it too. A flickered a movement. Another figure standing just behind her own reflection, its form lost in the murky depths of the glass. She blinked, and it was gone. It was just the light, she told herself. Just the shadows of a strange new house. By evening, the house had completely swallowed the daylight. The darkness outside was absolute. A thick, inky blanket that pressed against the windows. The family gathered in the dining room, their faces illuminated by the flickering, unsteady light of a few candles. Most of their belongings were still packed away in boxers, looming like silent monoliths in the corners of the room. In the candlelight, the mirrors seemed to come alive. The shadows danced and writhed across their surfaces, and the glass seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic shimmer, as if they were reflecting something deeper and darker than the room itself. Upstairs, Daniel decided to explore a small study tucked away at the end of a long corridor. The room was lined with empty bookshelves. In one corner, propped against the wall, was another mirror. This one was different. Its frame was silver-edged and ornate, and its surface was perfectly, unnaturally clear. He stepped closer, peering at his own tired face, but for a split second, the reflection wasn't his. The man looking back at him was older, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes dark and watchful, a stranger in his own reflection. Daniel blinked hard, his heart hammering in his chest. And just like that, it was gone. It was just him again, looking tired and stressed. He shook his head, blaming it on exhaustion. The move had been long and grueling. Downstairs, Clara was trying to make sense of the kitchen when she heard a sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Asterisk, tap, tap, tap. Asterisk like fingernails drumming against glass. She held her breath and listened. The sound was coming from the hallway. She followed it, her slippered feet silent on the cold floorboards. It led her back to the mirror at the foot of the staircase, the one Emily had been so fixated on. She peered into its cloudy surface. In the reflection, the hallway behind her was dark, the candles in the dining room not yet lit. But she could see someone, a figure, walking slowly down the reflected hallway, moving towards her. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. There was no one there. The real hallway was empty and silent, save for the distant moan of the wind. The wind picked up as the night wore on, rattling the window panes and making the old house groan and settle like a waking beast. One by one, the family members retreated to their new rooms, each trying to find some semblance of normalcy, of home, in this strange and unsettling place. They were completely unaware of the faint, almost imperceptible shimmer that was now crawling across the surface of every single mirror in the house, a silent, creeping tide of glass and shadow. In her room, Emily carefully arranged her dolls on a shelf, whispering goodnight to each one. The room was lit by a single, small lamp on her bedside table. As she reached over and clicked it off, plunging the room into darkness, she glanced at the wardrobe mirror, and her breath caught in her throat. In Tomito, the lamp was still on. Her reflection was still there, sitting up in bed, bathed in a soft, ethereal glow, and it was smiling. A faint, terrible smile in the dim light. From the darkness of the mirror, a voice whispered back, a perfect echo of her own. The morning came heavy and gray. Fog crawled across the lawn like a slow, cold breath from something sleeping just beneath the earth. I was the first one to wake up. The house was cold, a deep, penetrating chill, even though the heater was humming softly in the corner of my room. I pulled my robe tighter around myself and walked down the long, silent hallway. The mirrors lining the walls reflected my every step, but something was off. Each reflection seemed a little darker than the one before, as if the glass was absorbing the light, instead of just bouncing it back. Then I heard it, a faint echo, a whisper so soft I almost convinced myself it was just the wind or my own imagination. It sounded eerily, like my own voice, repeating my name. Double quotes, ... Clara ... I froze, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. Daniel? I called out, my voice sounding small and fragile in the stillness. There was no answer. Only the house itself seemed to breathe around me, the creak of aging wood, the sigh of water in the pipes. A normal house. I tried to tell myself. Just a normal old house. We all gathered around the kitchen table a little later, trying our best to pretend everything was perfectly normal. A family, having breakfast. Daniel sipped his coffee, his eyes scanning a newspaper he'd found tucked away in a drawer. The paper felt brittle, yellowed with age. That's weird, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. This paper's dated June 17th, 1964. It's older than I am. Maybe someone left it for nostalgia, I suggested, trying to sound casual, but my voice had a slight tremor. My daughter, Emily, wasn't listening. She was just staring at the shiny metal kettle on the counter, her small face warped and distorted in its curved reflection. Suddenly, she turned to me, her eyes wide and serious. Mom, can mirrors talk? I forced a smile, an uneasy one that probably didn't fool her. No, honey. Of course not. Mirrors only show what's real. She wasn't convinced. But what if they show what's hiding? Just then, our son Ethan dropped his spoon with a clatter that made us all jump. Okay, that's creepy. Can we please not start the day with haunted mirror talk? Believe it. But Emily had already turned back to her reflection in the kettle. I watched, my blood running cold, as her reflection's lips seemed to move silently, just a moment after her own had stopped. That night, the house felt truly alive. Every mirror seemed to hum with a faint, almost imperceptible energy, like glass vibrating to a tune only it could hear. Daniel couldn't settle. He was restless, pacing around until he finally went down to the study again. He had started taking notes, trying to document the strange things that were happening, to find some logic in the madness. His notepad was filled with frantic scribbles, reflections delayed, voices faintly audible in hall mirrors. Emily speaking to the other girl again. He stood up and looked into the ornate mirror above the desk. His reflection was there, as it so will be. But it was whispering. There was no sound, just the slow, deliberate movement of its lips. He leaned closer, trying to read them. But as he leaned in, his reflection leaned back, as if it were obeying its own set of physical laws. And then he heard it. It was faint, but utterly distinct. A voice from the glass. Get out. Daniel stumbled backward, his arm catching a lamp and sending it crashing to the floor. The sound stopped instantly. The mirror was normal again, showing only his own terrified face staring back. Upstairs, in her room, Emily was having a conversation of her own. She sat, cross-legged, on the floor before her vanity mirror. In the dim, soft glow of her nightlight, she whispered to the girl in the glass. What's your name? A pause. Then, the reflection's lips moved, forming words that Emily didn't speak. I can't tell you. Emily giggled nervously, a child's game that was tipping into something else. Are you my friend? The girl in the mirror nodded. But then, something shifted. Behind her mirror itself, a dark figure began to emerge from the shadows. It was tall and faceless, and it placed a long, pale hand on her reflection's shoulder. Emily gasped and spun around, her heart pounding. The room was empty. There was nothing there. When she cautiously looked back at the mirror, both her reflection and the terrifying figure were gone. It was just an empty mirror in an empty room. I couldn't sleep. A deep-seated anxiety kept me tossing and turning until I finally gave up and got out of bed. I decided to check on the kids, my feet patting softly on the cold floorboards. As I passed through the long hallway, I heard Ogunfan voices, like a conversation muffled by thick walls of glass. I stopped in front of the largest mirror, a towering, monstrous piece framed in twisting iron vines. My reflection showed the hallway perfectly, whose test it was. Except it wasn't. Daniel was there, standing behind my reflection, even though I knew he was asleep in our bed upstairs. This mirrored Daniel looked straight at my reflection, his expression grim, and his lips moved. I heard his whisper echo from the glass. They're not us. I let out a small strung-glad gasp and spun around. The real hallway was completely empty. I was alone. I slowly turned back to the mirror, my heart thudding in my ears. My reflection was still there, and it was smiling faintly, even though I knew, with absolute certainty, that I wasn't. Later that night, at exactly 2:47 a.m., Ethan's bedroom door creaked open. He stirred in his sleep, half awake, hearing the soft sound of footsteps in his room. His eyes drifted towards a closet mirror across from his bed. It flickered, just for a second. In its polished surface, he saw someone sitting at his desk. It was his own reflection, typing furiously on his laptop. But Ethan's real laptop was on his nightstand, closed and powered down. He stared, frozen in his bed, as the reflection slowly turned its head toward him. It grinned, a wide, unnatural smile, and its eyes were hollow mirrors themselves, two pits of endless, depthless black. With a surge of pure terror, Ethan grabbed the blanket from his bed, threw it over the mirror, and spent the rest of the night wide awake, trembling in the dark. When our family met for breakfast the next morning, the silence was heavy and suffocating. No one spoke about what they'd seen during the night. We all just sat there, pushing food around our plates. But every single one of us had noticed the same thing. Every mirror in the house was clean, perfectly, impossibly polished, gleaming as if they had been meticulously cared for. None of us remembered cleaning them. And then I saw it, etched faintly into the glass of the big hallway mirror, so delicate it was almost invisible, were words. They looked like they'd been formed from a breath on cold glass. "We can see you now." The storm hit us like a fist, shaking the old bones of this mansion. Thunder cracked overhead, and the rain beat against the windows, desperate to get in. I was in the study, watching lightning tear across the sky, when that familiar, unsettling feeling washed over me. This house, it's not just old, it's watching. There are cold spots that follow you, whispers that ride the drafts, and mirrors that seem to hold your gaze a little too long. The power went out, of course. Clara started lighting candles, and the shadows came alive, dancing and twisting on the walls like tormented spirits. Our daughter, Emily, was sitting on the floor, drawing, but she wasn't drawing flowers or happy little houses. She was sketching faces, dozens of them, all pale and staring. Clara asked her, "Who are they, sweetheart?" Emily didn't even look up. "The people from the mirrors," she said. "They want to be remembered." A chill colder than any draft in this house ran right through us. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Something was pulling me, calling me. I grabbed a lantern and headed for the attic. The stairs groaned under my weight, and the air up there was thick with dust and a strange, faint smell of smoke. The door creaked open, revealing a graveyard of forgotten things, old furniture, trunks, all shrouded in white sheets, like ghosts. In the far corner, covered by a torn cloth, stood a tall, imposing mirror, and leaning against the wall next to it was an old portrait. The man in it was half faded, but his eyes were pale and his smile was cruel. The nameplate read, "Dr. Alaric Vane, -1892. As I wiped the dust from the canvas, a disturbing thought struck me. This man, he looked familiar, like someone I'd seen in a fleeting reflection. Just then, lightning flashed, flooding the attic with electric blue light. For a split second, I saw it. Movement in the mirror. The man from the portrait, Dr. Vane, was standing right behind me, his cruel smile fixed on my reflection. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. There was nothing there, just me and the dust. But when I looked back at the mirror, he was still there, in my reflection. And then I heard it again, that soft, mournful whisper on the air. He never left. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with that attic mirror. I couldn't stay away. It was like a magnet, drawing me in. I'd stand there for hours, just staring into its glassy depths. And sometimes I'd see things. Flickers of motion, ghostly images of children running down the halls, a woman weeping silently, and flashes of fire consuming the house. It was as if the mirror was a window into the house's buried memories, replaying tragedies the walls had tried to forget. One night, Clara found me there, lost in its spell. "Daniel, please," she begged. "Come to bed. You're scaring me." I could barely pull my eyes away. "It's showing me something," I whispered. "Itese." Like watching a film of the house's past. As primeras a idit, the reflexa shifted. A woman appeared, trapped behind the glass. Her face was a mask of terror, her hands pounding silently against the surface, pleading to be freed. Her mouth formed words, but I couldn't hear them. Clara leaned in closer, her voice trembling. "What is she saying?" I watched the woman's lips, and the blood ran cold in my veins. I whispered, "She's saying, don't look too long." The next evening, the mirror began to glow. A faint, sickly light pulsed from its surface, even in the total darkness of the attic. I had to see. I climbed the stairs, my heart in my throat. But this time, what I saw wasn't just a flicker from the past. I saw the house on fire. Our house, these same hallways, these same rooms, all being devoured by flames. And in the inferno, I saw a family screaming, trapped. A man, a woman, and 2 children. Their faces were twisted by the heat and terror, but I recognized them. It was us. It was my family. I stumbled back, tripping over a dusty box, my mind reeling. When I dared to look again, the fire was gone. The mirror showed only my own reflection, pale, trembling, my eyes wide with horror. But I wasn't alone. Standing just behind me, a faint, translucent figure watched with a predatory stillness. It was Dr. Alaric Vane. Meanwhile, Emily's drawings had become even more disturbing. She was drawing him, the man from the portrait, over and over. When Clara finally got the courage to ask her where she'd seen him, Emily's answer chilled her to the bone. "He comes through the mirror at night," she said simply. "He says he made this house." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "What does he want, Emily?" Our daughter looked up, her eyes dark. "He wants to fix the broken ones, the ones who forgot their faces." That was the last straw for Clara. That night, she went to the attic herself, flashlight in hand, determined to end this nightmare. She aimed the beam at the portrait of Dr. Vane. His painted eyes seemed to follow her every move, and his cruel smile looked wider than before. She felt a presence behind her, and spun around to face the mirror. She saw her reflection, but something was terribly wrong. She was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling, but her reflection was perfectly still, frozen. Then, slowly, terrifyingly, the reflection raised its hand and pointed, not at her, but toward the portrait. Clara turned back to the painting. A thin crack had appeared on the canvas, running from the top of Dr. Vane's head straight down to his heart. Behind the torn fabric, something glittered. She reached out, her hand shaking, and pulled the rest of the canvas away. It wasn't just a painting. Hidden behind it was another mirror. It was small, but it was alive. Its surface pulsed with a faint, internal light, and from deep within it, a sound began to grow. Dozens of voices, whispering, chanting, overlapping in a maddening chorus. They were all saying the same name. Bana, 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 Bane. The mirror rippled like water, and faces began to press against the inside of the glass, their mouths open in silent screams. They were trapped. And as Clara stared in horror, one of the faces swam into focus. It looked just like her. The storm had been raging for 3 long days, an unrelenting beast of wind and rain. Black rivers of water carved paths down the windows of the mansion, and the entire house seemed to groan and shudder under the constant assault of thunder. Sleep had become a stranger to me. I'd close my eyes, and the attic mirror would instantly fill my mind, its dark glass a portal to my nightmares. In every dream, the reflection of Dr. Alaric Vane was there, waiting, a patient predator behind the glass. My wife, Clara, was the anchor of our family, but even her strength was beginning to fray. Her smiles, once a source of warmth and comfort, now trembled at the edges, a fragile defense against the growing dread that had seeped into our home. And then there was Emily, our sweet, quiet daughter. The light in her seemed to be dimming. Her sketchbooks, once filled with vibrant drawings, now lay untouched. She had found a new, unsettling pastime. She spent her nights talking to the mirrors, her soft whispers swallowed by the cavernous silence of the mansion. It was our son, Ethan, who stumbled upon the next piece of the puzzle. He was a born explorer, and his curiosity had led him to the East Wing, a section of the house we usually avoided. A perpetual chill clung to the air there, a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Tucked away behind a massive, ornate bookshelf that was pulled slightly away from the wall, he found it. First, just a keyhole winking in the gloom. Then, as he pushed the heavy furniture aside, a full wooden door was revealed. Its surface was a dizzying tapestry of carvings, wide open eyes, and grasping hands, etched deep into the ancient wood. He pushed, but the door was unyielding. "Mom, Dad, you have to come see this," he yelled, his voice echoing down the long, empty corridor. I hurried over, flashlight in hand, its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The carvings seemed to glisten, almost weighty, under the light. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It was locked solid, as if it had been sealed for a century. But when Clara reached out and laid her hand flat against the wood, something impossible happened. The carved eyes and hands seemed to shift, to writhe under her touch, as if the very wood itself was alive and breathing. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice tight with fear, "I don't think it wants us to open it." Her warning hung in the air, a sensible plea against the unknown. But my own fear was being overshadowed by a desperate need for answers. I remembered an old, ornate key I had found, tucked away in a study drawer. It was marked with a single, elegant letter V. It was a long shot, but I had to try. I retrieved the key, my heart pounding against my ribs. Returning to the door, I slid it into the keyhole. It fit perfectly. With a turn of my wrist, the lock clicked open with a sound like a long, mournful sigh. The door groaned, swinging inward on protesting hinges, revealing the darkness beyond. The moment we stepped across the threshold, the light from my flashlight flickered and died, plunging us into near total blackness. A second later, a single bulb overhead sputtered to life, casting a weak, sickly glow over the space. We were in a vast, circular chamber, and every inch of the curved walls was covered in mirrors. Tall, slender mirrors stood next to small, round ones. Some were pristine and flawless, others were a spiderweb of cracks, and each and every one was draped in a thick, grey sheet, like shrouded corpses. The air was colder than a tomb, an icy presence that stole a breath from our lungs. Before we could even process the scene, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening boom that echoed the thunder outside. Panic flared in my chest. We were trapped. Ethan, recovering first, managed to get his flashlight working again. Its powerful beam sliced through the dimness, darting from one covered mirror to the next. And that's when we saw it. The mirrors weren't just reflecting us. They were reflecting other things, other places, other times. One mirror showed a long, sunlit hallway we had never seen before in the mansion. Another showed a woman in a vintage gown, weeping silently. And then, one reflection made Clara gasp and clutch my arm. It showed Emily, standing stock-still in the very same dress she was wearing now. But she was older, a teenager, her face pale and her eyes vacant. "This isn't possible," Clara breathed, her knuckles white where she gripped my sleeve. Just then, a voice, soft as a whisper but clear as a bell, echoed through the frigid air. "Welcome back." We stood frozen for a moment, the voice washing over us like a cold wave. Then, a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand, took over. We began moving through the room, pulling the grey sheets away from the mirrors, one by one. Each uncovered glass was a new window into a world of horror. One mirror showed a vision I'd already had in my nightmares. The mansion engulfed in flames, burning against a black sky. Another showed the cruel, focused face of Dr. Vane as he used the scalpel to carve glowing runes into the surface of a mirror. In a third, we saw dozens of ghostly faces, men, women, and children, their features distorted as if they were pressed against the inside of the glass, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. While Clara and I reeled from the horrific visions, Emily had wandered to the very center of the room. Her eyes were wide, not with fear but with a strange, hypnotic fascination. "They're calling me," she said, her voice distant, dreamy. "They say I'm the key." A chill, colder than the room itself, shot down my spine. "Emily, get away from the mirrors," I commanded, my voice sharp with alarm. But it was too late. She was already reaching out, her small fingers extended toward the largest mirror in the center. The instant her fingertips made contact with the cold glass, a cataclysmic event unfolded. Every single mirror in the room lit up simultaneously, flooding the chamber with a blinding white light, as if 100 bolts of lightning had struck at once. We screamed, shielding our eyes, as the reflections around us twisted and came to life. Each mirror now held a different, nightmarish version of our family. Broken, burned, screaming, crying versions of ourselves played out horrific fates. Clara saw a reflection of herself clutching the lifeless body of a child. I saw myself, trapped on the other side of the glass, my face a mask of terror as I pounded silently, trying to get out. Ethan saw his own reflection staring back at him, a wide, malevolent smile stretching across its face, even as our real son screamed in pure terror. And then, in every single mirror, a figure materialized behind our tormented reflections. It was Dr. Alaric Vane. His pale face was half swallowed by shadow, and his eyes gleamed like polished silver. His voice, now amplified, echoed from every direction, a chorus of cold amusement. "You've awakened my collection," he said through his legion of reflections. "Welcome to the room where truth cannot hide." Adrenaline surged through me. I lunged forward, grabbing Emily and yanking her away from the central mirror. The moment she was free, the mirrors began to tremble violently, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water. The light bulbs in the ceiling exploded one by one, showering us with sparks and glass. "Run!" Clara shrieked over the cacophony. We scrambled for the door, but it was gone. The wall where it had been was now a seamless, solid sheet of mirrored glass, reflecting our own terrified faces back at us, trapping us in this kaleidoscope of horrors. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the room. One of the smaller mirrors fractured, a spiderweb of cracks spreading from its center. A thick, black mist began to pour from the breaks in the glass, slithering across the floor like oily smoke. The mist coalesced, forming wispy hands, contorted faces, and whispering voices that crawled into our ears. "You opened it," one hissed. "Now we see," breathed another. "Now we remember." In a moment of desperate courage, Ethan grabbed a heavy metal rod that had fallen from a fixture and swung it with all his might at one of the larger mirrors. It shattered with an explosive crash. The black mist screamed a high, piercing, inhuman sound, and instantly retreated, vanishing into the cracks in the floor. For a single, blessed moment, there was silence. And in that silence, the door reappeared. We didn't hesitate. We threw it open and ran, not stopping until we slammed it shut behind us, the final click of the lock echoing our frantic heartbeats. Back in the familiar hallway, the air felt blessedly warm, almost normal. But the nightmare wasn't over. I glanced at the decorative mirrors hanging on the hallway walls. They were no longer reflecting the hallway. They were reflecting the mirror room we had just escaped, even though the door was locked and sealed behind us. And standing in the reflection of that room was Dr. Alaric Vane. A faint, knowing smile played on his lips. As we watched it frozen in horror, he slowly lifted a hand and pressed it against the glass from his side. A cold dread washed over me. I looked down at my own hand, and there, on my skin, was a faint, damp handprint, cold as the grave, as if it had been pressed there from the inside. Have you ever caught a glimpse of your reflection and felt a chill? A sense that the person staring back isn't quite you? What if that feeling was real? Welcome back to our story, where we uncover the terrifying truth behind the looking glass. The house had grown colder, heavier, since that dreadful night in the mirror room. No one spoke of it, but an unspoken dread hung in the air. We all felt it, a chill in presence, the unnerving certainty that we were no longer alone. It was subtle at first, a reflection in a windowpane that moved a fraction of a second too late, a shadow in the corner of your eye that seemed to draw a breath. The house itself felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. The true horror began one ordinary morning. Clara was in the bathroom, brushing her hair, when she froze. Her reflection wasn't moving. It simply stood there, its hand frozen mid-air, its eyes fixed on hers with an unnerving intensity. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel rushed in, and as he stared into the glass, the reflection cracked a slow, unsettling smile. But Daniel hadn't moved a muscle. A faint, spiderwebbing crack appeared on the mirror's surface, as if the smile itself had broken the glass. That night, a frantic energy took over. We covered every mirror, every reflective surface in the house, with sheets and blankets. But it was too late. We were about to learn that these things, they didn't need glass anymore. Ethan was the first to see one outside a mirror. He was walking down the long, dim hallway when he saw it himself, standing at the far end. It was a perfect copy, down to the last detail of his clothes, his hair. Except for the eyes, they were completely, unnervingly black, like pools of ink. Ethan, driven by a mix of terror and rage, charged toward it, shouting, "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't flinch. It just smiled that same cold smile and whispered in Ethan's exact voice, a voice full of ancient resentment. "You left me in there for too long." And just like that, it vanished, leaving behind nothing but a faint, shimmering distortion in the air, like heat rising from pavement. Then Emily began to change. Our vibrant, artistic little girl stopped drawing. She would just sit for hours, her gaze fixed on empty spaces, her eyes wide as if she were watching something none of us could see. The life seemed to be draining out of her. When Clara tried to hold her, to comfort her, Emily's skin was ice cold to the touch. She leaned in close and whispered, her voice a hollow echo of her own. "They're coming through. The mirrors can't hold them anymore." Clara pulled back, her heart pounding, and in that moment, under the dim light, she saw it. For just a split second, tiny, almost invisible cracks appeared beneath the surface of Emily's eyes, like fractured glass. Meanwhile, a desperate search for answers led Daniel to the dusty, forgotten corners of the basement. Tucked away under an old, stiff tarp, he found it, another mirror, this one ancient and framed in dark, carved wood. As he wiped away layers of grime, he saw a faint inscription etched into the frame. 2 crosses to become. A shiver traced its way down his spine. He peered into the glass, expecting his own tired face, but he saw someone else. It was him, but not him. This version was older, paler, with a haunted, knowing look in its eyes. It was watching him from the other side. "You shouldn't have opened the room," the reflection said, its voice a dry rasp that seemed to come from the mirror itself. "Now, there's no you, and no me. There is only us." As it spoke, the surface of the mirror rippled like water, and a cold, pale hand pressed against the glass from within. The fingers splayed as if trying to break through. Panic seized Daniel. He scrambled out of the basement, his mind screaming, shouting for Clara, for Ethan, for Emily. He found them in the living room, standing together in the growing dusk. But as he burst in, his words died in his throat. Something was terribly wrong. They were standing perfectly still, all facing him, their expressions blank. Their eyes were dark and hollow, just like the figure Ethan had seen. And then he saw it. Shimmering in the dim light behind each of them, like a ghostly afterimage, stood their reflections, their doppelgangers, watching, waiting. Then, in perfect, horrifying unison, both his family and their phantom doubles spoke as one, their voices merging into a chilling, resonant chorus that filled the entire house. "The mirror remembers what they live and forget." The words were punctuated by a thunderous crack that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Every light bulb shattered, plunging them into absolute darkness. But the darkness wasn't empty. A low, resonant hum began to emanate from the walls, from every surface that had once held a reflection, and from the covered mirrors, from the darkened windows, from the very shadows themselves. Their other selves, their cold, forgotten twins, began to step through into our world. The barrier was broken. The crossing was complete, and in the oppressive darkness, the house was no longer just haunted. It was now occupied. The mansion wasn't just alive anymore. It was awake. The very air felt heavy, electric, humming with the sound of glass, trembling somewhere deep within the walls. After that night, nobody really spoke. We were like ghosts in our own home, avoiding mirrors, whispering instead of talking, snatching sleep in broken, fearful fragments. But the house never slept. Every single night, at exactly 3 a.m., the same sound would echo through the silence, a faint, sharp crack, like something delicate breaking in the dark. And every morning, we'd find another mirror shattered. The cracks always started from the inside. I started keeping a notebook, trying to make sense of the madness. The mirror above the fireplace, a web of fractures. The bathroom mirror, blackened from within, as if by some internal fire. But the mirror in the attic, that one glowed faintly, untouched and whole. And that's when it started to click. The mirrors weren't just objects. They were portals, fragments of a much larger, horrifying whole. And Dr. Alaric Vane, the man who built this house, he didn't create them to trap ghosts. He created them to become one. I found Clara, my voice a strained whisper. He's using them. Each mirror is a piece of him. He's collecting himself, putting himself back together. Clara just stared at me, pure horror dawning on her face. Then ... What happens when he's whole? I looked up towards the attic, towards that ominous glow. Then he steps through. Emily hadn't said a word in days. She just sat in her room, staring at her vanity mirror, which we had covered with a sheet. Sometimes, I'd catch her whispering to herself, a low, constant mur. Then, one morning, she looked at me with eyes that seemed far too old for her small face. "They're breaking free," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "But they're angry. He lied to them." "Who lied, sweetheart?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Dr. Vane," she replied. "He promised them faces. He promised they'd be real again." It was in that moment I understood. Emily's reflection, the one we thought was just a child's game, had been talking to her long before we ever set foot in this house. That evening, a deafening crash ripped through the hallway. I rushed out to see Ethan standing before a shattered mirror, his hand sliced and bleeding. "Ethan, what did you do?" I yelled. It wasn't me," he stammered, his face pale. It just exploded. Before our eyes, the shards on the floor began to twitch. They rearranged themselves, reforming into small, sharp fragments shaped like eyes. And then, each one of them blinked. Ethan stumbled back, horrified, as a chorus of high, cold whispers filled the air. "Don't look away." Clara ran to pull him back, but as she did, one of the shards sliced her palm. Blood bloomed across its surface, and for a terrifying second, her own reflection in the fragment bled with her from the other side. As night failed, the house itself began to tremble. Every piece of glass started to vibrate violently. Pictures slid from the walls, windows cracked, and the crystals on the chandeliers chimed a frantic, discordant tune. The house was breathing, expanding, and contracting, grotesquely alive. A thunderous voice echoed from every reflective surface, from the very walls around us. "You broke the balance." The walls began to ripple like water, and from the cracks, pure shadow poured out. It crawled up the stairs, coalescing, merging into a tall, shimmering human shape. Chimera turned inside out. Dr. Alaric Vane had returned. His voice hissed from the shifting form. "You took my place. Now, I'll take yours." It began. One by one, the mirrors in the mansion exploded. Shards flew like silver rain, each tiny piece carrying a distorted reflection. Screaming faces, pale hands reaching out, the whispers of forgotten souls finally breaking free. I grabbed Clara and Emily, shouting for Ethan to run, but he was frozen, staring at the broken mirror in the hall. His reflection was still there, intact, and it was smiling. "Go," he yelled, turning to us with a desperate look. "I'll catch up." He spun around and smashed the last standing mirror in the hallway with his bare fist. For a single, silent heartbeat, the world went quiet. Then, a scream erupted from every mirror at once, a deafening, endless wail that shook the house to its foundations. The walls cracked. The ceiling pulsed. The entire mansion was coming apart. We scrambled up to the attic, to the source of it all. The great mirror of Dr. Vane stood there, glowing brighter than ever, its surface swirling like liquid mercury. And inside, we could see them. Thousands of faces, every reflection this house had ever stolen, all pressed against the glass, their silent mouths begging for freedom. I knew what I had to do. I stepped forward. "You want to be whole? Take me." The glass rippled, and a form appeared inside Dr. Vane, smiling, proud, monstrous. "You offer yourself freely? How noble." He reached a hand out from the swirling surface. I grabbed Emily's hand and whispered, "When it shatters, run!" Then, I plunged my bloody hand into the mirror. The glass itself screamed. Blinding light flooded the room as cracks spiderwebbed across its entire surface. Vane roared, his voice mingling with the shrieks of thousands. The mirror exploded in a storm of light and The blast threw us down the attic stairs, sending us tumbling into the chaos below. When the dust finally settled, the attic was a wreck. The great mirror was gone, leaving only its empty frame. And I was gone, too. But on the floor, in a large, glassless shard, my reflection was still there, smiling faintly. Clara collapsed, sobbing. Beside her, Emily whispered, her eyes wide and distant, seeing something the rest of us couldn't. "He's not gone," she said. "He's inside." The mansion was quiet again. Too quiet. After the explosion in the attic, most of the mirrors were gone, leaving nothing but empty frames and shattered glass littering the floors. A stale smell of iron and smoke hung in the air. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking, but it didn't seem to reach the old house. The shadows clung to the corners as if they were alive. I sat on the grand staircase, my hands trembling uncontrollably as I stared at the exact spot where Daniel had vanished into the mirror. Just gone. Next to me, Ethan was a statue, lost in a silent shock I knew all too well. And Emily was on the floor, always drawing mirrors, always the same shadowy man lurking in the background. But something was different now. Each time Emily finished a drawing, the paper seemed to ripple, just for a second. And if you looked closely, behind the stark ink lines, it was like the house itself was moving, shifting. It was a detail so subtle, you'd think you were imagining it. I wish I had been. Ethan was the one who found it, buried beneath the splintered floorboards of the attic where the main mirror had exploded. It was a black leather journal, its covers scorched and peeling. He brought it down to me, and I opened it with a sense of dread. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting. It was the personal diary of Dr. Alaric Vane. With a shaky finger, I traced the first entry. To whoever finds this, know that I did not create the mirrors to trap souls. I created them to remember them. We kept reading, and with every page, the entries grew darker, more obsessive. The house is a vessel, each mirror a memory. They called to me because they are me. Every reflection holds a fragment of what I've lost to patience, the failures, the faces that begged to forget. The last line of the entry sent a chill straight through me. But memory demands form. To remember is to live again, to lie again. He's to take. I slammed the book shut, the sound echoing in the unnatural silence. He wasn't just a scientist, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He was completely obsessed. Ethan looked up from the diary, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. No, Mom, he's not just obsessed, he's still here. That night, the whisper started again. At first, it was faint, like a draft sighing under the door. But soon, it grew, filling every room, every hallway. But the voices weren't angry anymore. They sounded contemplative. They were remembering. The boy, he freed us. One voice hissed from the shadows. The father, he opened the gate, whispered another from the walls. The girl, she carries the glass. Drawn by the sound, Ethan and I followed the whispers into the main hall. The broken mirror frames, once empty, now stood upright, each one glowing with a faint, ethereal light. Inside the frames, fragments of the past shimmered and swirled. We saw glimpses of people who once lived in this mansion. We saw families moving in, their faces full of hope, only to vanish within months. We saw flashes of fires, floods, and the tormented faces of people pressed against glass, screaming without a sound. The house wasn't just haunted, it was reliving the same tragedy. Aubert and Aubert, for generations rebirthing itself through every soul that dared to enter. That's when I saw her. Emily was standing in front of one of the half-broken mirrors, her small frame silhouetted against its dim glow. But her reflection, it wasn't matching her movements. When Emily blinked, her reflection stared back, its eyes wide open. "Sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle, steady. "Step away from the mirror." She didn't turn. "He's showing me," she whispered, her voice distant. "He's showing me everything." As I got closer, I saw her eyes. They had turned glassy, reflective, mirroring the entire room in their tiny surfaces. A gasp escaped my lips. "Mom," Emily said. But the voice wasn't just hers. It was deeper, layered, ancient. "He remembers through me." At that exact moment, the lights in the mansion flickered violently. Every surviving shard of glass in the house began to hum, vibrating with a low, rhythmic sound. It sounded like a heartbeat. The house's heartbeat. Ethan, who had been frantically flipping through the diary, let out a cry. He'd found the final entry, scribbled in a shaky, desperate hand. "When the vessel breaks, the memory seeks a new host. Blood binds the glass. The child is the key." He dropped the book as if it had burned him. "Mom? It's her. He's inside her now." My mind raced, connecting the terrible dots. The cuts from the glass shards, the whispers that only she seemed to truly understand, the drawings. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. Dr. Vane hadn't died, he had simply moved from mirror to mirror, soul to soul waiting for the perfect vessel. And Emily, my innocent, artistic daughter, she was that vessel. Suddenly, the entire mansion began to shake. Pictures fell from the walls, crashing to the floor. The wooden floors rippled like water under our feet, and from every direction, a sound began to build, not a scream this time, but a chorus, 1,000 voices, all whispering the same 2 words, in perfect, chilling unison: remember me. The shattered mirrors began to reform. Shards of glass slid across the floor, drawn by an unseen force, rebuilding themselves into one enormous, seamless mirror in the center of the hall. Its surface wasn't reflective anymore. It was alive, pulsing with a faint, inner light, like the beating heart of some terrible creature. And deep within its surface, a figure appeared. It was Daniel. Pale, silent, his eyes completely empty. I reached out, a sob tearing from my throat. "Daniel, is that you?" His reflection gave a single, slow nod. Then, he raised a finger, not looking at me, but pointing. Behind me, I turned around. Emily was standing there, her eyes no longer her own, but glowing pools of pure silver. Her voice echoed with 2 distinct tones, her own childlike pitch, and the cold, measured cadence of Dr. Vane. "The house remembers," she said, a slight smile on her lips. "And it's time for you to join the memory." The lights went out, every sound stopped, except for the faint, delicate crackle of settling glass. When Ethan opened his eyes again, the mansion was silent. The mirrors were gone. His mother was gone, his sister was gone. Only one reflection remained, his own, faintly visible in the dark glass of the front window. And from somewhere deep within the house, a familiar voice whispered, Daniel's voice, "The memory isn't done yet." The house was no longer a house. It had become a labyrinth of pure, cold glass. Every wall, every door, every surface was now a mirror, stretching hallways into infinite reflections. It was a dizzying, silent maze of light and shadow, countless copies of the same empty world, repeating over and over again into eternity. I moved slowly, my own reflection mocking me from 1,000 different angles. The silence was heavy, oppressive. "Mom," I called out, my voice sounding small and foreign in the vastness. "Emily, is anyone here?" Only the echoes answered, but they weren't my own. They returned, twisted, distorted, whispering in voices that were almost familiar, yet chillingly wrong. "Ethan, come closer," one hissed from a corridor to my left. "You're almost home," another whispered from the shimmering ceiling above. Each step was a gamble, each turn a new plunge into this disorienting reality. The air was thick with a strange, electric tension, the kind you feel just before lightning strikes. I pushed forward, drawn by an invisible current, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Somehow, I found my way back to the grand hall. But it had transformed. The walls weren't just reflective anymore. They shimmered like liquid silver, flowing and rippling as if alive. And there, at the very center of the room, stood the great mirror. It was whole again, its ornate frame gleaming, its surface pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light, like a monstrous, beating heart. I froze, transfixed by the sight. Within its depths, shapes moved. Not reflections, but figures. My family, trapped within the glass. My mother, Clara, stood perfectly motionless, her eyes wide with a silent, unending terror. Her hands were pressed flat against the inside of the mirror, a desperate, futile gesture. Beside her stood Emily. But this wasn't the sister I knew. She was unnervingly calm, her expression serene, her eyes shining with a faint, silvery light that mirrored the pulse of the great glass heart. And standing behind them, a looming, pale figure, was Dr. Alaric Vane. He watched me from inside the reflection, his face a mask of quiet, paternal pride. "You survived," the doctor's voice echoed. Not from the room, but from within the mirror itself. It was smooth, confident. "You were always meant to." My blood ran cold. I took a shaky step closer, my hand clenching into a fist. "Where is my family?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. "What have you done to them?" Vane offered a faint, condescending smile. "They are remembered," he said, as if explaining a simple truth. "And in a world that forgets, to be remembered is a mercy." The mirror's surface rippled like water. 2 visions bloomed within the glass, shimmering side by side. On one side, I saw my family, peaceful now, their faces relaxed as if in a deep, untroubled sleep, cocooned within the silver light. On the other side, a brutal contrast. The real world, our house, shattered and in ruins, battered by the relentless storm raging outside. "Join them," Vane's voice urged, a silken temptation. Be remembered with them. Live forever in this perfect reflection, untouched by time or decay. He paused, letting the offer sink in. Or, you can leave, walk away, and forget. Let the house die, and take the memory of your bloodline with it. I reached out, my fingers trembling as they touched the cold surface of the mirror. It vibrated with a low hum, a resonant frequency that seemed to call my name, pulling me in, promising an end to the pain. A perfect, eternal reunion. But then, behind Vane's triumphant figure, I saw a flicker of movement. My father, Daniel. He was still fighting, pounding his fists against the invisible walls of his glass prison, his face a mask of desperate urgency. His voice, faint and distorted, crackled through the static hum of the mirror. Don't trust him, Ethan. It's a lie. If you break it now, everything ends. You can set us free. Vane's.com expression finally broke. He turned sharply, his face twisting into a snarl of fury. He is only a memory, he spat, his voice losing its smooth veneer. An echo. I am the truth here. The mirror pulsed faster, the light growing more intense, more demanding. The choice was laid bare before me. An eternal, beautiful lie, or a devastating, forgotten truth. I looked at my father's fighting spirit, my mother's frozen terror, Emily's cold, silver eyes. I clenched my fists. You said the mirrors remember everything, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Then, remember this. My eyes scanned the floor, littered with the debris of the house's collapse. There, glinting in the mirror's pulsating light, was a sharp shard of glass, the very same piece that had cut my mother's hand what felt like a lifetime ago. I snatched it up, its edge biting into my palm. With a guttural roar, born of grief and fury, I lunged forward and slammed the shard into the heart of the great mirror. The impact didn't make a sound. It made a scream, a high-pitched, soul-shattering shriek of tearing reality. Light erupted from the point of impact, not like a glow, but like a fire, spreading in a web of blinding cracks across the surface. Every reflection in the labyrinthine house, every single mirrored wall, shattered in unison. A chorus of 1,000 screaming voices filled the air, a symphony of agony and release. The entire house convulsed, the very foundations shaking as if the world itself were breaking apart around me. Dr. Vane reached out from within the fracturing mirror, his form dissolving into thousands of glittering pieces of light and shadow. You fool. His voice boomed, fragmented and distorted. Without me, the memories die. They will be forgotten. The storm of light and sound intensified, threatening to tear me apart. But through the chaos, I found my voice. Then let them rest, I screamed back, pouring all my pain into those 4 words. The final explosion was absolute. It consumed everything: the mirrors, the walls, the voices, the memories, all collapsing into a blinding, silent, white void. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I felt was wet grass against my cheek. The first thing I smelled was morning dew and damp earth. I was outside. The storm was over. I pushed myself up slowly, my body aching. Behind me, where the grand mansion once stood, there was nothing but a blackened, skeletal ruin. The windows were empty, the mirrors were gone. Only ash and rubble remained, smoking faintly in the gentle morning light. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the air felt clean, pure. The oppressive weight was gone. Then, I saw something glinting in the mud near my feet. A small shard of glass, perfectly clear, miraculously unscathed by the destruction. Primeta picked it up. As I held it to the light, for just a fleeting second, an image appeared within it. My family, Mom, Dad, and Emily. They were all there, standing together in warm sunlight, and they were smiling. Happy and free. Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time, they weren't tears of terror or grief. They were tears of release. I smiled back at the tiny, perfect memory. Goodbye, I whispered. I let the shard drop from my fingers. It fell silently, sank into the soft earth, and disappeared. Years passed. Life moved on. The world did its best to forget the house on the hill. In a quiet, dusty antique shop on the edge of a distant town, a new item was put on display. An old, beautiful mirror, with an ornate frame and faint, silver veins that snaked across its surface like frozen lightning. A child, wandering through the shop while their parents browsed, happened to walk by. They paused, catching their reflection, and gave a wide, innocent smile. The child turned and ran off to find their mother, but in the mirror, the reflection didn't. It stayed behind, and slowly, it smiled again. Thank you so much for joining me on this terrifying journey to its conclusion. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Until then, stay safe, and maybe be careful what you see in the mirror.